Emily Muehlstein, and this is a public hearing presentation for the framework action addressing Vermillion Snapper, Yellowtail Snapper, and the venting tool requirements for reef fish. A framework action is a standard and quick way to implement management measures that have already been included into a management plan. The light blue boxes indicate times when the Council asks the public to contribute their opinion on the issue. And right now we're at the public hearing phase, which happens right before the Council takes final action. Final action on this framework is expected to be taken in February of this year. This framework addresses three separate issues. The first issue is the Vermillion Snapper annual catch limit and also recreational bag limit. The second is the annual catch limit for Yellowtail Snapper. And the third issue is the current venting tool requirement used for reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico. Starting with Vermillion, in 2011, a stock assessment indicated that the stock was not overfished and not experiencing overfishing. The Council's scientific advisors, the Scientific and Statistical Committee, increased the acceptable biological catch level for the years of 2012 through 2016 from 3,420,000 pounds to the values that you see on the bottom right of your screen. So since the acceptable biological catch limit was increased, the Council has the option to increase the annual catch limit. You can see on this chart here that the annual catch limit must be set either below or equal to the acceptable biological catch level. So there's two actions addressing Vermillion. The first one is to set the stock annual catch limits from 2013 through 2016. And then the second action is to address the Vermillion Snapper bag limit. So action 1, the Vermillion Snapper annual catch limit. The current annual catch limit is set as 3,420,000 pounds. That's equal to the previous acceptable biological catch. Landings of Vermillion Snapper have increased since 2006, with the exception of 2010, which is the year that the oil spill occurred in the Gulf. There are a number of different alternatives addressing the Vermillion annual catch limit. The first alternative is the Council's preferred, and it's a no-action alternative. So that would mean that the annual catch limit would remain at previous levels, 3,420,000 pounds, and there would also be an annual catch target in place of 2,940,000 pounds. The second alternative would set the annual catch limit equal to the new acceptable biological catch levels. The third alternative would set the annual catch limit at 95% of the newly recommended acceptable biological catch, and those are the values that correspond. The fourth alternative would set a constant annual catch limit at 75% of Fmax in the year of 2006. So that would set the annual catch limit for Vermillion at 4,320,000 pounds. And then the final alternative, alternative 5, would set the annual catch limit at 75% of the overfishing limit. So the overfishing limit is the threshold that if harvest exceeds, then the stock is considered to be overfished. And these are the corresponding values for the annual catch limit. So moving on to action 2, the recreational Vermillion bag limit. Right now, Vermillion Snapper are included in that 20 reef fish aggregate bag limit. And the purpose of this action is not to reduce harvest, it's to ensure that the increase in harvest that I showed you the trends of do not exceed an annual catch limit. There are three alternatives for this action. The first is no action that would keep Vermillion in that 20 fish aggregate with no individual bag limit. The second alternative would create a 15 fish per angler bag limit within that 20 reef fish aggregate. And then the Council's preferred alternative, which is alternative 3, would create a 10 fish per angler bag limit within the 20 reef fish aggregate. So moving on to Yellowtail Snapper, the stock assessment indicated that the stock is not overfished and not experiencing overfishing. The scientific advisors raised the Gulf of Mexico acceptable biological catch from 725,000 pounds of Yellowtail Snapper to 1,012,500 pounds of Yellowtail. So the Council has the option to raise the annual catch limit for Yellowtail Snapper because the acceptable biological catch was increased. So there are a couple of alternatives here. There's a no action alternative which would keep the annual catch level at 725,000 pounds, with an annual catch target of 645,000 pounds. The second alternative is the Gulf Council's preferred alternative, and that would set the annual catch limit at 11% below the newly recommended acceptable biological catch. That would be 901,125 pounds of yellowtail snapper. And then the third alternative would set the Gulf annual catch limit equal to the Gulf acceptable biological catch, which again is 1,012,500 pounds. The final issue addressed in this framework is the venting tool requirements for reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico. Conservation and management measures have to minimize bycatch and also minimize the mortality or the rate of death of that bycatch. So in 2008, the Council created a rule that mandates the possession and use of venting tools when targeting reef fish. Recently, some publications have suggested that venting might not be necessary or even desirable in all release situations. And there's also been a number of new ways developed that minimize bycatch and also minimize the mortality of bycatch. So the Council is considering changing the venting tool requirements. The first alternative for this action is no action. So you would still be mandated to possess a venting tool and use a venting tool when targeting reef fish. The second alternative would modify the requirement so that a venting tool is required on board the boat, but not required to be used. And then the third alternative would eliminate the venting tool requirement altogether. You wouldn't need to have one, you wouldn't need to use one. So that sums it up. Please send us your comments by January 29th, 2013. Follow this link below to an electronic comment form. If you want to read the full document, you can find it at this link. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to send us an email.